We're joined now by Pastor Keon Henderson from the Lighthouse Church of Houston, Texas. Rabbi Sharon Brous, founder of the Jewish congregation Ikar in Los Angeles, and Dr. Pamela Ayo a Buddhist community Dharma leader and author of Black and Buddhist. And Nicole and Bianca are still with us. Listen, we might change the world with this panel. I think this is the incredible ensemble of people here together. Pastor Keon, let me start with you because we just heard Nicole and Bianca's very personal story. I thought they were both very brave to share this on national TV because all of us know the minute you start talking about faith, you're holding on to a live wire. But this conversation is about those moments when you doubt faith or you're looking for it, you don't understand it. And those are all relatable. Those are things that people go through every day. Even now in this pandemic, a lot of folks have questioned faith and why now. How do you process why it's so difficult for us to have a candid conversation like this when it's normal?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. And I listen intently to both stories. I can relate to both. I've lost a parent. I've lost a brother, and I'm a Texan, so I kind of get all of those things. But I wanted to say to those who are listening that there is a difference between asking God a question and questioning God. Those are two totally different things. And I think that a God who asks questions is okay being asked questions. Remember, he was with his disciples, and he says, "Who do men say that I am?" And some say thou art Elijah, some say thou art John the Baptist. And I'm sure that if you go through any of the holy canticles of any of the books that represent the faiths, the higher power of that scripture is documented as having asked questions of humanity. And I don't think that a God who asks questions of humanity has an issue with humanity asking questions of that power. So it's okay. I think the difficulty of it is etched in our traditionalism, that everything has to be abstract, everything has to be cut and dry. And it is what it is, and it is how it has to be. And so I would say to both young ladies, keep your heads up as a man of faith. But I think that both of you all have a journey, and it's not over yet.
Well, Rabbi Brous, we all have this journey to the point. And even as Pastor Keon said, you know how many people watching said, wait a minute, she or they, because it is so deeply personal how you view your religion. But going back, though, to the faith, especially now with this very difficult thing that the world has experienced. And we're almost at that 1 year mark where none of us knew. And a lot of us were asking why and what is faith? How do you define it, particularly when you see an uptick of memberships and people wanting to participate in getting that answer, what is faith?
Well, a couple of extraordinary things happened at once over the course of this past year with the pandemic. On one hand, this tiny invisible virus showed us how profoundly connected the world is, that it could travel across borders, across oceans, really affecting everyone everywhere, not the same, obviously with disproportional impact on Black and Brown communities and on the poor, but really touching everybody in the world. So on one hand, we realize that we are interconnected. At the same time, we're pushed into even deeper isolation from one another. And so we're called into our own homes. We're not allowed to touch each other. We're not allowed to open our mouths and sing together in churches and synagogues and in public spaces. And so part of what we're seeing is that there's another pandemic going on right now. In addition to the pandemic of COVID, in addition to the pandemic of racism in this country, there's also a pandemic of loneliness. And we're trying to hold all of the weight of that at once. And it's leaving people feeling profoundly unsettled. And I think part of the work of faith communities right now is to help people retether to the world.
Well, to your point, the connection, the minute Pastor Keon got on, he connected with Bianca and Nicole, not having ever met them. And that's so much of what it requires us to find that connective tissue. But Dr. Ayo, I'll ask you, can you have faith without religion?
It's necessary. It's necessary to have faith. First of all, Ms. Hall, I want to thank you for inviting me to be on this program. And I want to thank you for the courage that you have to have this very critical conversation at this very critical time in our lives. Our faith and our ability to move forward through life is not dependent on any religion. or actually even not dependent on any spiritual practice. It's based on our experience of having succeeded in doing something in the past, and also our experience of observing other people succeed in their lives. So that's how I look at faith. Faith is based on our experience of success. And religion, when we grow up and we become mature and we can choose what religious path we want to be on, if we want to be on one at all, it should support that belief in ourselves that we can move forward in life, connect with others, as we've already talked about, and open up to goodness, love, compassion, respect for others, and refrain from the desire to harm others because we don't agree with their view.
Pastor Keon, it's so interesting. The other day I was driving. I live in New York City, and I passed a church that's still closed as a result of the lockdown. And it, not even my church, it just made me sad to see the shuttered doors of any church, mosque, synagogue, just where people would gather to worship. You, like so many others, have broadened it into Zooms and online services. What do you think that that's brought to the table, especially during this crisis?
Yeah, I think that faith is multi-generational, like so many other things, right? Like every time I update one of my devices, because I'm not a guy that'll get one every time they release one. So every time I get a new device, I recognize that the plug that I used to have doesn't work for the device that I have, right? And so I've got to find this new source of power. And I think that what has happened with the church is we're still using a technology that doesn't fit with the power source. This generation has come to know God as one who loves everybody, right? But their problem is that they are having their issues with the people who represent him. That's what Lecrae was saying earlier. And so they are enthralled with this spirituality, but they are rejecting organized religion. And so spirituality is this search for God. So what we did is said, people are searching for God. So how are we going to find ways for them to connect? We don't have our physical buildings anymore. And since the building is shut down, should the seeking for Christ or the seeking for God or whatever religion you are, what should that subside because our synagogues and our mosques and our temples are closed?
Yeah.
We didn't think so. So we opened it up to Zoom. We streamed our services and recognized that people are less critical of the church now than they've ever been before, because the church is actually doing now what we've said we always should be doing, and that is to get outside of the walls of the church.
Bianca and Nicole, I always wonder why someone would participate in something like this, because you're on national TV. My Twitter will be blowing up. People will be commenting about this. I don't have a choice. It's what I do for a living. You had a choice. Bianca, why did you want to participate in something like this today?
I think, like I mentioned before, the way that I was raised, even though I was raised in the church, was to be very open and to have conversations about things that may make you uncomfortable, and to sit in rooms with people that aren't like you, and also to share the story of, my story of faith and finding, like Lecrae was just saying, separating religion from faith and finding relationship instead of tradition and religion. For me, it was important to share that story. A lot of people, especially over the past year, have lost a lot of loved ones. And I'm sure there's so many questions that they're having, questioning themselves, just as someone else was saying, questioning even their life, who they are, why they exist. And I had all those thoughts as well. So I think for me, it was beyond me. As much as it's amazing to share my story and to share a part of my mum with the world, it's also about sharing love and encouragement to those that are on the journey also.
Nicole, quickly, though, because before we have a great performance from Lecrae, what made you want to participate in this risky conversation for a daytime show to take on? But nevertheless, here we are.
Well, Tamron, I think it's really important, and something that we all kind of have in common on this show is that the idea that if you're suffering and you're looking for something in your life, that there are so many different paths that could lead you to that. And I wanted people to see that even someone like me, who lived on the complete opposite of the spectrum, chose a more difficult path just because of the fact that it led me where I wanted to be, and it made the changes in my life that I needed at that time and that I still use today. And it doesn't matter what you were born into, if that's not working for you, or if you're not feeling that peace in your heart, there are so many ways that you can find that path to that higher purpose, whatever it may be for you.
Rabbi, we talk so much about empowerment these days. For many, faith is empowerment. Is that how you see it?
I actually, if I could, I want to try to address something that I've heard as a kind of running theme throughout this, starting with your conversation with Lecrae. And Tamron, I'm so grateful to you for taking the risk of speaking openly about this with all of us. I actually think that what many people are alluding to is really a great failure of religion. What we've seen over the last several decades is that when religion appears in the public space, it is often an excuse for violence, for extremism, for regressive policies that end up limiting the rights and dignities of other people. Or it is a kind of soulless, spiritually dead, perfunctory engagement, or it's a brand of escapism, just like any other drug. And I think what we're hearing from everybody throughout this conversation is that there's a yearning to get back in touch with what is at the heart of all of that, with what it means to believe in the language we use in my tradition, that every single human being is created in God's own image and therefore deserves to live with dignity. That's faith. But what religion could be is the gathering of people together who want to build a society that actually reflects those core faith values. What would it mean to really build a society that's built on love, that's rooted in justice, that's propelled by our moral imagination and by our greatest, most audacious faith commitments to recognize the dignity of every human being? That's a kind of reclaimed religion that I think people are really hungry for.
Well, I am just grateful that all of you participated in this conversation. As I said, we will have a plethora of opinions, but at the end of the day, we're about intention on this show, and the intention was to have a pure and real and honest conversation, and I could not have shared this space with better and more inspiring leaders. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.